from the Washington, D.C. area. It's the Inside Scoop, all the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop, Virginia. I'm Bettina Lawton, and I'm your host. And we are going to be talking about the General Assembly tonight. And our first segment is going to be with Benjamin Tribbett. Ben is back again. He, I think, is becoming our resident political analyst. He's going to talk to us about last week's special election, where Kathleen Murphy finally won in the 34th House of Delegates District. And then we'll talk a little bit about the primary that's going to be tomorrow down in the sort of Richmond and Rico area with Joe Morrissey. And then we're going to move on in the show to talk with Ken Plum and Janet Howell. And then at the very end, Sandy Evans will be here from the school board to talk about their legislative agendas. So, Ben, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Now, we all know it was a squeaker in a snowstorm, but Kathleen Murphy did win 51.24% of the vote against Craig Pariseau with 48.67. She's a longtime resident in that district. He was brand new, didn't have a lot of name recognition. Is that why she won?
I think that she was helped by the fact that she had run last time, but the primary reason why Kathleen won really was the snowstorm. In Loudoun County, which is normally more Democratic than the Fairfax portion of this district, Craig actually won by 3 votes. It was very, very tight. And normally, if you looked at a general election type of turnout, if Loudoun County was voting Republican in this district, the Republicans would carry it. But what happened to Kathleen was this snowstorm, this district runs from McLean through Great Falls, and there's a lot of people that are not accessible in a snowstorm to really get out. Scott Somerville joked at her party. He actually said, well, it's a good thing that our voters don't have as long of driveways as their voters do.
Right, exactly.
And I do think that actually played a big factor. If you look at, we brought a couple of charts for this, but in comparing it to the last year's congressional race between John Faust and Barbara Comstock.
Okay.
Kathleen got as high in her home precinct as 66% of Faust voters coming back for her in the special election. That's very good.
That's good.
But in Loudoun, it was in the 30s. In Seneca precinct out in Great Falls was her low of 39.9%. In Fairfax, in the Fairfax precincts, of Faust voters coming back for her. Craig Pariseau was in the low 30s in some precincts. He didn't have a single precinct where he got to 50%. Of Barbara Comstock's voters. But where you see the real dramatic change is when we talk about these low turnout precincts from this special election versus where they were more moderate turnout. And the low turnout precincts were precincts that are a little further out, had this driveway issue I think that Scott was sort of describing. In the congressional election, I don't know if we can bring up the...
Which one do we want? Let's tell the people in the...
Let's look at the low turnout chart here.
Pie chart. Okay,
Yeah.
Let's see if we can get that up. There we go.
Yeah, so in the low turnout precincts in this special election, you can see what the results were in the general election in November. They were overwhelmingly Barbara Comstock. She won 3,889 votes. Faust got 2,641. Just real landslide precincts. And those were the precincts that showed up in much lighter numbers in the special election. Only about 40% of the general election voters returned overall. That was Colvin precinct in Hunter Mill, Cooper in Western McLean, Forestville, Hickory, and Seneca in Great Falls. So it was all the precincts where it would be less accessible. Now, in the precincts that had a little bit more moderately good turnout in this special, because they were a little closer to the polls, the streets were a little bit more accessible. In those precincts, and we can show on that chart, you can see Barbara Comstock only got 52% of the vote in those precincts, and John Faust got 48%. So these are much more Democratic precincts that had the good turnout in this special election. And that was just enough to put Kathleen over the top. Now, I will also point out to you, Bettina, that there are 3 precincts in the delegate district that are in Fairfax County that are not in the 10th congressional district.
Okay.
2 of them are in Hunter Mill, and then 1 precinct in McLean that's in the 8th congressional district. And in those 3 precincts, Kathleen won in a landslide. I think it looked to me like Barbara's Comstock's organization was all that Craig Pariseau really had, and her organization just wasn't as strong where she hadn't had to run this year. They had let up on what they were doing in those precincts, and all 3 of them, Kathleen Murphy won in big margins, bigger combined than her overall district-wide margin.
Well, and I had noticed that in the Hunter Mill ones, because when I first saw them, I was like, what happened, and hadn't really sort of tracked it back to Barbara Comstock, because you're right, she didn't run in some of those.
Well, the 200 mil ones where Kathleen did really well, and then Salona number 2 is the other one. And all 3, Kathleen won in big margins. And you combine that along with the light turnout in Great Falls, particularly Forestville Precinct. Forestville Precinct is so Republican. Barbara Comstock won that one precinct by a larger margin than Kathleen Murphy won the entire district by.
Wow.
In this special election. And it was one of the lightest turnout precincts in the district on both sides, because Forestville is the part of Great Falls where you really have to drive a long way on one-lane roads each way.
Oh, and those would not have been.
Would have much more difficult to get around in.
Right. Well, and we did see that because I was working one of the polls in her district, and based on the numbers of people who had showed up by 10 o'clock in the morning, they were sort of doing this informal pool of, well, how many are we going to get the whole day? And they're like, oh, we might get 253. And we ended up with 715 people. And we were absolutely shocked that there were that many, but it didn't start coming until after 10, which is usually when it starts slowing down, because people have already left, they've already gone to work. But that wasn't happening. People were being delayed in the day. It
was a totally different type of election, what you'd normally get. And so it doesn't mean a ton towards November. I will say this, though, it's always good to be an incumbent. Right. And so even though this may have been sort of a happenstance win for Kathleen, she's now the incumbent. Right. And that's going to position her much better for the general election than if it was an open seat.
Well, that's true. I mean, Craig Pariseau did seem to just be relying on Barbara Comstock's campaign and people. There didn't seem, that's what I kept hearing anyway, was that that's really what was happening, that he didn't have anything of his own.
Right, and I think he depressed his own turnout a little bit with the refusal to do interviews with the local newspapers. This is
What was that? That was very strange.
It was strange, and this is a district that's very high education levels, high incomes. It's not the type of district where you duck a Washington Post reporter who's doing a fluff piece on you.
Right, and then he ducked the Loudoun Times or something. I mean, I could sort of get the Washington Post because it's the Washington Post and it's liberal and whatever. But then it was like they're also ducking things like the Loudoun Times. Well, it made it sound like he was too afraid or too insecure on issues.
In the entire D.C. area, I don't know where you'd have a better market penetration for the Washington Post than like McLean, North Arlington, Georgetown. That little corridor is sort of the core of what the Post is. So, I mean, these are longtime residents who are older, and to not do an interview at the Post, I think is just, it was just silly. And, in a low turnout special, how much of a difference that makes, it's hard to tell, but it couldn't have given Republican voters a lot of confidence in him.
Right. That was certainly the impression it kind of left, was somebody who wasn't willing to take any kind of risk and just talk to the issues.
Right.
Yeah, didn't work. So it doesn't, do you think this has any, other than the advantages of being an incumbent, do you think this does anything about Kathleen's chances in a year when she's got to do it all over again?
Well, sure. Well, this November she'll be back on the ballot. I think this November the real key is going to be Supervisor Faust is going to be running with Kathleen in most of those precincts. And I think they're going to sink or swim together. I don't see a lot of crossover voting that's going to happen there. So the Republicans are going to need to field strong candidates against both of them. And I think it's going to be a team effort. And Kathleen and John are going to benefit from the fact they're both incumbents and both Republicans are challengers. But I think if one goes down, they both will.
Wow.
There's my prediction. They'll either both survive or they'll both go down.
Okay. Interesting. Do you think that the Republicans will field someone other than Craig Pariseau the next time?
It's hard to tell. I mean, the Republicans should have fielded a better candidate this time. The district's packed full of people that would be excellent candidates on both sides.
Yeah, I thought there would have been kind of this little surge since Barbara had been in the seat since, I guess, 2009, that there would have been a whole bunch of folks, a bench waiting to go. So I was a little surprised that it was
It was really curious why that didn't happen and why the only other Republican that ran was Al Johnson, who sort of was affiliated with Rick Santorum, who actually lives in that district. It was a real mystery, I think, as to why the Republicans didn't have a stronger candidate ready to go in this district. Very strange.
Yeah, I thought so too. Well, let's talk for a couple of minutes about Joe Morrissey. That is tomorrow. Right. So they go into session tomorrow.
They go into session Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Right.
And we've got I guess Wednesday then would be the election.
Tuesday's the special election.
All right, Tuesday's the special.
Right.
I'll get these dates right. What's going to happen down there? He's running as an independent.
Well, there was some breaking news right when I was on my way over tonight. The police down there have re-raided his office. He's actually, they're actually outside right now. Apparently there's like 8 cop cars looking for something else, and the police detectives were seen walking in and out of another grand jury.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it's actually in the Richmond Times.
The night before?
An election, right.
An election?
Right, so apparently there must be something urgent, or they really want him out of office.
Yeah.
One or the other, but so they've raided his office today. This is in the Richmond Times. They just put it up around 5 o'clock.
That is shocking. There better be something emergency, because otherwise this is clearly an attempt to interfere with the election tomorrow.
Right, and it's a, you know, I have trouble predicting this. I mean, Joe was way up in the early polling on this, right. But, you know, the as wild as this election has been, and there have been, you know, the family members of this woman that he's alleged to have taken advantage of have been starring in TV commercials. She has not been, because she's apparently still siding with Joe and saying Joe did nothing wrong. Mm-hmm. It's just a crazy election, and it's very hard. It's hard to figure out what voters are going to come out tomorrow to participate in this election. I think it'll be very light turnout, mm-hmm. and that could lead to anyone winning, even the Republican has a chance.
Republican. Well, and I did wonder, I was talking to one of the delegates last week about what do you do if he gets reelected? And it was, you know, well, gee, we don't want him in the caucus with us, and, you know, we could throw him out. And I said, well, how does that play with the quote-unquote Democratic message? People just elected him, and you're going to turn around and try and nullify the vote. Right,
and I think that, you know, you look at what the issues are that are in the Democrats are pushing this session, and these are issues that, you know, all fit well with what Joe's already done. So when you're going to the voters asking them to toss him out of office, he sounds like a Democrat. His record has been very progressive. It's actually right. The left of the Democratic Party.
It is.
And so I think they're going to have a tough time making the argument of why he needs to be tossed on the issues, mm-hmm. Which means all they have really is everything
character.
Else, and the character, right?
It's the character issue.
You know, it's hard to gauge, and it's hard to gauge whether the House will expel him or not. I mean, I've heard some members talk about maybe they need to temporarily suspend him because they don't want a member serving in jail at night coming to the House of Delegates, because he's in jail through March. Mm-hmm. But he hasn't been convicted of anything that disqualifies him.
Right.
And it does set a really dangerous precedent to start making calls of expelling people who haven't met that threshold of automatic expulsion.
Right. Well, it'll be very interesting to see what happens tomorrow in that race. And I appreciate you coming back again. I think, you know, we can talk throughout the election that's coming up, but hopefully there's no more specials. Yeah. But I appreciate you coming, so thanks a lot.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
This is firstgov.gov, where we're obsessed with getting you government information.
Brand new student loan applications on the site, baby. This calls for a celebration. Where's your uncle?
So in the end, it was either take the astronaut gig or come work here. What can I say? Duty called.
Dude, that's my cop.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty sure that's Sam's cop.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No. Sam's. No.
Just log on or email us and get what you need.
C, change of address form. That's how it's done.
D, driver's license renewal.
E, emailing social security information.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Nice, we'll allow it. All right, Ed.
What are those?
Government surplus cars for auction.
You posted those online last time.
No, you did.
I'm posting them online this time.
For all your government information, firstgov.gov.
Oh, what have we got here? Sometimes you feel tired. You can't seem to lose those extra pounds off your midsection. And your joints hurt when you take the stairs. Well, you're getting older. But I'm happy to say that there's some simple things we can do to keep you happy and healthy for years to come. We can also lower your risk for some serious diseases the older population is often subject to. Proper nutrition is more important than ever. Your body has changed, you know. Not as many treats. A basic exercise plan, lots of walks and fresh air, and most importantly, come and see me for twice-yearly checkups to help ensure the best possible quality of life. Now, how does that sound? Good boy.
Improve the quality of life for your elderly pet. Schedule twice yearly checkups that include preventive care and regular lab work. A message from the veterinary members of the American Animal Hospital Association.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. This is Inside Scoop Virginia. I'm Bettina Lawton. Our next guest is Delegate Ken Plum. This interview was pre-recorded at the Democratic Committee Road to Richmond, where I had a great conversation with Ken, so stay tuned and listen in. This is Inside Scoop Virginia. I'm Bettina Lawton, and I'm your host. And we are here at the Fairfax County Democratic Committee's Road to Richmond event. We are seeing the legislators off to Richmond for the next legislative session, and I am pleased to have as my guest Delegate Ken Plum. He is the longest-serving delegate in the Virginia General Assembly in the House of Delegates. He represents Reston and little parts of Fairfax, but mainly he's known as the Reston guy. So, Ken, thank you so much for coming.
Bettina, it's a pleasure to be with you. I always appreciate the Democrats doing this Road to Richmond event. Springfield is on my way, headed south for Richmond.
Exactly. We try and make it easy. Well, I wanted to talk with you about what do you think is going to happen this year in the General Assembly. It's now fully in Republican control. So what do you see happening?
Well, this is supposedly our short session, and we supposedly don't do as much work. But however, I don't think that's going to be true this year. Our economy recovery has been sluggish, so we're going to have to go back and refine our budget a bit. Refining our budget means actually making more reductions because we don't have the revenue that we had anticipated earlier. The irony in doing our budget will again bring up a topic that we spent so much time on this past year, and that is the expansion of Medicaid. The two get interrelated because it is the case that not only will the federal government reimburse the 100% the cost of expanding Medicaid, it will actually pick up some of the costs that we now incur in state government in providing care to the indigent. So if we were to expand Medicaid, we'd actually save money out of our current budget. But as you know, the Republicans are firmly in control. They're ideologically opposed to anything that has any relationship to President Obama, and they're ideologically opposed to expanding Medicaid. So that probably won't happen. Too bad for Virginians, too bad for uninsured Virginians, but too bad for Virginians generally, because we could save ourselves some money by expanding Medicaid.
Well, in the budget hole, because when you were back in the special session, you also did some budget cutting. So you've got a couple $100 million. Is that still the number you're going to look for?
It's about $300 million that we still have to work out the differences on. And ironically, expanding Medicaid would pick up about $200 million in current costs and could offset that as a reduction. But as I say, there's a reluctance on the part of the majority party to even discuss expanding Medicaid, as important it is to the nearly 1 million Virginians who are uninsured and the 400,000 Virginians who would be eligible under Medicaid expansion.
Well, the thing that I find particularly stunning about that whole debate is that the people who would benefit the most from a Medicaid expansion are in the sort of southwestern parts of Virginia, and there is where you find the delegates and the senators who are so opposed when it could really benefit their own people.
Yeah, there's so much of Virginia now that's red, and it's bright red, it's Tea Party red, and the Republicans who are otherwise some of them moderate are afraid of primary challenges and won't stand up for their own people, and those people are fed a regular line of propaganda about death panels, rising cost of insurance, and a whole bunch of stuff to try to convince them that Obamacare is not good for them, when in fact it would provide them the much needed medical care.
Well, and that, I think, the issue of the primary from other more conservative people in their party is a really true kind of problem that they have. And you saw it, for example, at the federal level with Eric Cantor, and he got defeated in his primary. And I see in the papers that even Delegate Howell, who is the House Speaker, is facing an intra-party primary.
And make no mistake about it, as try as he might, Speaker Howell has bent over backwards to try to be accommodating to the Tea Party position, but they want and want and want. Cut taxes, they want to cut more taxes. Cut programs, they want to cut more programs. I'm not sure exactly what the overall goal of these people is, but it's certainly not good governance. It's certainly not good for the Commonwealth. And yeah, Speaker Howell now, try as he might, now has an opponent in a primary and recognized that 2 years ago, 2 Republican committee chairs lost their seats in primaries to Tea Party opponents who went on to win a general election.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing, and
Pretty amazing.
not a situation you really want to have to be in if you are a moderate Republican. You sort of have to hide your stripes in that case.
Or you have to be brave and go out and talk directly to the people and bring some truth and good common sense to these issues.
Bravery seems to be in short supply, and I remember actually Congressman Jerry Conley making a similar remark in this past election, where so many people were running away from the president, and Congressman Conley embraced him and won handily.
Yeah, won handily, and I am so proud of our president for the kinds of things that he's represented and the kind of work that he's done, and I think we also stand up and be proud of who we are as Democrats because we're talking about the good of the Commonwealth.
Exactly. Well, let's talk about some of the bills that you have, what you're going to see if you can get accomplished this year, recognizing that it'll be an uphill fight given the Republican control.
Well, again, it's my belief that there are issues that are before us that need to be taken up, whether or not they're going to pass, whether or not they're popular, the things that need to be done. I have a strong concern about the increase in gun violence in our society, gun violence that affects the youngest of our population, gun violence that affects families and so on, and something we ought to do about gun violence. I put in a bill last year, and I'll put in a bill again this year that will expand the background checks. A common sense proposal that doesn't attack the Second Amendment at all. It simply extends current background checks that one takes if one goes to a federally licensed gun dealer. But now if you go to a gun show, you can buy a gun without any license background check. So you can be a multiple felon or a single felon. You can be crazy as a bedbug, and you can buy a gun. No background check. I think we need to extend background checks as they now are existent with gun dealers to also gun shows, and to make sure that people who have been violent in their past, violent by their criminal behavior, and in the few instances where mentally ill people are violent, that they not be allowed to have guns. And I don't want to overstate that mental illness thing because it's a very small number of people who are in that case, but we should take that into account. So I'll have in a bill to expand background checks. These bills get sent to a committee that's known as a killing committee. No pun intended, but it does not report those bills out. At the same time, I'll also endorse the governor's proposals, a number of proposals. I'm so proud of the governor standing up, speaking of standing up, and gun issues generally. And he wants to put back the one handgun a month bill that I helped pass back in the 1980s that we repealed a few years ago, and put it back to, again, keep gun running out of Virginia.
Well, that was a huge issue back in the day, and I was a little surprised, or maybe not so much surprised, when 2 years ago, I guess it was, they decided to just sort of let that die.
Yeah. Well, you know, it came into being because the background checks or the follow-up checks on crimes in New York at that time found that most of the guns and crime in New York came out of Virginia. That's what led to the impetus of that bill. Why would we repeal it to open up that possibility of happening again? I'm not sure. The governor's saying that let's put it back, and I agree with the governor.
Right. Well, and that is going to be a difficult bill to pass in the current configuration. Sure. Let's talk about ethics. We've got former Governor McDonnell is going to be sentenced, I think, on Tuesday, perhaps. Right. And is anything going to happen? Because there was a whole lot of chatter about it last year, and nothing really happened.
Well, some little things happened, but what was obvious about what happened was that we didn't go far enough. And a number of us at the time realized that we weren't going far enough, but we couldn't bring along the majority of thinking with that. So we're going to go back, and we're going to, I believe, adopt the governor's position to saying that there ought to be a $100 limitation on any gift at all. And secondly, we ought to put into effect a commission that can resolve ethical issues about the appropriateness of one's behavior. And for example, often comes to mind are trips that legislators participate in. And some of these trips, I can tell you because I've taken them, are legitimate fact-finding, informational kinds of trips. I've been on, for example, alternative energy fuel trips where we looked at what some states and countries are doing with alternative energy. I think that has a legitimacy to it. Attendance at the National Conference of State Legislatures, I think that's a legitimate trip. But some people go duck hunting in Scotland. Sorry, I have trouble believing what that has to do with the legislature. Right. And there are other people who go to the Masters Golf Tournament. Don't think that's good. And so what would happen would be a commission would be put in place to pass judgments on when that would be appropriate that one participate in that and when one not do it. And I think that's something we should do. It's overdue.
Now, there had been some kind of a commission set up last year, and Governor McAuliffe didn't approve the funding for that.
Yeah.
It was just too weak, or?
I think he saw it as too weak, and I think he wants us to put more teeth in its provisions, and I think that's what will happen this time, and I'm confident that it'll happen. There's just too many instances around now of legislators who've gotten in trouble, a governor who's gotten in big trouble, that we cannot sweep this under the rug. We have to deal with it.
Okay. And the ethics bill that you're supporting, one of the interesting aspects of some of these proposals is this notion that you have intangible gifts, that somehow you can't actually value the trip to the Super Bowl or the box seat at the Redskins, which I find to be ridiculous. There is a price to that.
And that notion has gone aside. I mean, the recognition that once you get into trying to make that distinction, that's not a true distinction. So I think that will be off the table, and that we'll look at gifts as gifts, and if there's a question about a gift, it would be the commission then that would pass a judgment. It would be an independent commission to look at whether or not a gift has a legitimacy to it or not.
And so would the commission be sort of a proactive, where if you were thinking of a trip, you could go and get an opinion, or it would be somebody complains afterwards?
No, it would be a beforehand kind of proposal.
Okay.
Yep.
And then let me ask you, minimum wage. I understand you've got a minimum wage bill that you're also putting in.
I do. I don't give up easily. I had a bill last year. It would take 3 steps to get to $10.10. I think it's a sensible thing that we ought to be doing. Everybody knows about the great inequality that we now have in our community. So I've put in a bill to raise the minimum wage to $10.10, the federally proposed amount, in 3 years, or to go with the federal amount should that go into effect earlier. But to recognize that there's some people who simply can't make it on $7.25. No way you can make it on $7.25. So I'm going to be pushing hard for that bill.
Any thought that it might make it? Again, with the Republicans in control, they seem to be universally against things like minimum wage.
I'm hopeful that somewhere along the way we can shame them into something. And so but if all else fails, we'll shame them. But there's a lot of community interfaith groups and others who recognize that this is the right thing to do. And again, if I chose bills that were simply going to be easy, there aren't many anymore. We got to stand up for what's right, and over a period of time, we bring about change.
And I probably shouldn't ask you this because it's still early in the year, but are you going to run for re-election?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I get a lot of good sense out of what I'm doing. I mean, I get a lot of pleasure out of what I'm doing, particularly in terms of service to my constituents. I work full-time as a legislator. I'm retired otherwise, so I'm able to do that. So I'm looking forward to an election this year.
Well, thank you so much for coming, Ken. I really appreciate you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Good luck in Richmond.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
Around the world, 1 out of every 3 women will be beaten or otherwise abused in their lifetime, often by a family member or loved one. A future free from violence. It's all she's ever wished for.
Did you know you have the power to stop children from joining gangs? You can help a father find a job and home for his family. You can assist a woman who can't afford the medicine she needs to live and the home she can't live without. You can choose to make a difference in our community. Support Volunteers of America, and you can help improve the lives of nearly 2 million Americans each year with programs and services that help individuals and families overcome their challenges to become as independent as possible. Support the programs that are working in our community. Contact Volunteers of America today. Call 1-800-899-0089.
For some folks, saving for the future is easy, but for you, it might take a little more effort. Saving for your future is your responsibility, and there's a lot to save for.
I never thought of that.
Like your child's education, perhaps uncovered medical expenses, or just to be sure you can live the way you want when you retire. The time is now to save for tomorrow. Save now or work forever. The choice is yours. Choose to save.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. This is Inside Scoop Virginia. I'm Bettina Lawton, and our next segment is with Senator Janet Howell. She represents the 32nd District, and we recorded her at the road to Richmond. This is Inside Scoop Virginia. I'm Bettina Lawton, and I am here with Senator Janet Howell. She is getting ready to go down to Richmond for another session of the General Assembly. And we're going to talk with Janet about what she thinks is going to happen. There's been lots of changes and controversy in the Virginia Senate this past year, and we'll talk a bit about some bills that she's also looking at. So welcome, Janet. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, Bettina. I love being on your show.
Well, let's talk about the state of the Senate, because for those of us on the outside reading about what happened, particularly last June with Senator Puckett, although I see now the federal people have said they're not going to bring any kind of case against him for what happened with his resignation. You've got a tobacco commission that everything I see looks totally out of control. What is going on in the Senate? It's now in Republican control.
It is in Republican control, but we're fairly confident that's temporary, that we'll take it back in November. There was a lot of skullduggery that went on with Senator Puckett. It was really unfortunate. It changed the dynamics of the whole state political system and what we're able to accomplish in Richmond. Unfortunately, there were no indictments, but it has totally changed things. It has, as you mentioned, revealed sort of the latent corruption that surrounds the Tobacco Commission. They have a large amount of money. I think it's about $500 million at their disposal. And it seems to be run by politics, and it seems to be pretty much just a slush fund for certain delegates and senators from that area.
It certainly does. It's sort of like if you're a friend of a certain unnamed delegate or senator, you can get millions of dollars for projects that, at least as I read them in the paper, and of course there may be more to it, they don't seem to be particularly well thought out or particularly useful. And it's a lot of money that we got, I think, as a result of the tobacco settlement that should be going for better purposes and helping the farmers who are no longer growing tobacco and helping people affected by tobacco.
You know, one of the things that happened about 3 years ago, JLARC, the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission that I'm a member of, did an in-depth study of the Tobacco Commission and came up with a couple dozen proposals to get some kind of control on it, and virtually none have been implemented. So this is one area we have got to look at. I frankly don't see why that area of the state should have all of the money going there when our area is also suffering. Mm-hmm. Why would that be?
I guess it has to do with who the delegate is who's running the show, right? Well, now what, the Republicans have taken over again, so what effect has that actually had on how the Senate's going to be run? We still have Lieutenant Governor Ralph Northam, so we only need to get one seat back to take control again in November. But as a practical matter, you've got a session to do before that can happen. So what do you think will happen this session?
The biggest change, the most significant change, in my opinion, is what's happened to the committees. Senior Democrats have been thrown off of significant committees. Our more junior members have been deprived of some seats. They have fewer seats than they should. Oddly, I was unscathed. It doesn't seem to matter who's in charge. I have the same committees. But I'm really the exception. I think there are only 2 or 3 of us that didn't have committees taken away. And we have had very senior members thrown off of committees they've served on for years, and that is not the way we've done it in Virginia in the past. If you're on a committee, you don't get removed unless you want to be. You give permission, or somehow the numbers work that we just can't squeeze in that number for each party. But what they've done is just take control of committees. For example, Finance Committee, the most significant committee, only has 5 Democrats out of 15.
Wow.
Yeah.
I thought the committees were supposed to be proportional. So if you have 15, they should have 8, we should have 7.
That's what it should have been.
Wow. So is this more of the destruction of the famous Virginia way? I mean, you always hear about this, which I'm always highly skeptical of, I must tell you, but this notion of fair play, that's supposedly how we do things. This seems to just be a further step away to sort of a more cutthroat type of political system.
Yeah, it definitely is. And it's not perceived by the public as that significant, but I've got to tell you it is. I've been in the Senate now. This is my 24th session in the Senate. And when I started, it was 22-18. We were in the majority. People were not taken off of committees. There was a collegiality that is not totally lacking. I mean, there are some friendships across party lines, but it's deteriorating rapidly. And when we were in control very briefly last year, we actually put out an olive branch to the Republicans by not doing to them what they had done to us. And then when they took over, they did it again.
Well, you know,
so it's very difficult.
I sometimes wonder just how naive the Democrats are, because I remember when that happened, and I thought to myself, you know, yes, it's the high road, but don't think that it's going to help. If we lose control, they'll do it again. And I sometimes do think about Democrats. What are we doing?
Yeah.
What are we doing?
Yeah.
It just is amazing. But I think the committee assignments, as you say, are so important because so many bills just die in committee. And as I recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, the committee votes are not recorded.
In the Senate, they are.
They are, okay.
They are in the Senate. It's the House that doesn't record subcommittees.
Okay.
Yeah.
So at least if there's a bill you're particularly interested in and it dies, you can go and find out the cause. Who voted what?
Well, who did? I mean, but that's the way it has been. Whether it will be now, we don't know.
Oh, good Lord. Well, let's talk about the redistricting, bipartisan redistricting. I know that's an issue that you're very interested in. What's going on with that? There was that court case that came out that said at least our congressional districts are unconstitutionally drawn. We've got all of the minorities apparently packed into Bobby Scott's district. So lines have to be withdrawn. Is that going to have any effect on the actual state lines?
Well,
state
what's very interesting is in the last few days, there's also been a lawsuit put in against the House of Delegates districts. So that is also under litigation. We'll see where that goes. I have a feeling it has a pretty good shot at having the districts overturned. Now, when we did redistricting, I was chairman of the Senate committee that did redistricting. We were very careful on making sure that we had the best attorneys letting us know that what we were doing was legal. I'm sure the chairman of the House committee, comparable committee, will say the same thing, but there have been from the beginning questions about some of those House districts.
Right. So is there an effort down in the General Assembly to deal with this, to come up with some kind of a bipartisan task force? I know for years there have been. I know Senator Creed Deeds was a big advocate at one point of it. Is that going to go anywhere? Is there any effort to do that now that we've got some court impetus to do something?
Yes. It's a very interesting dynamic right now. A number of very important business leaders in Virginia have decided that the only way to really have government functional again is by changing the redistricting. And they have put money into this. They have set up an organization with organizers throughout the state. to work on this. They have a website, One Virginia 2021, I believe it's called, and they have legislation they're proposing. They've asked me to put in the bill, the constitutional amendment, putting together a nonpartisan redistricting commission.
Okay.
And I'm really looking forward to this because in the past it was basically viewed as a Democratic effort.
Right. Well, I am surprised that the businesses are jumping in.
But the business community is into this.
So what do from the business perspective, what is the reason that they think that bipartisan redistricting is somehow going to be better for them than this sort of?
They think that our government is not functioning properly. They don't like how divided everything is and how rancorous it is. They view that as bad for business.
It's true.
Yes, and I think they're right.
Yes. I do too.
So they're getting involved, and some of them have a long tradition of being involved with kind of good government initiatives. Lee Middleditch, who is heading up the effort, started the Sorensen Institute, for example.
Okay.
He has a decades-long commitment to having well-prepared elected leaders who can work together.
Okay. Well, maybe something will happen now that the business community is involved.
I hope so.
Now, you're also very involved in election reform.
Yes.
So
yes.
What's with that?
Well, because I'm the ranking member of the Privileges and Elections Committee, I have a number of bills I'm putting in dealing with election law. I'm trying to get rid of having to have an excuse for in-person absentee voting. That's failed in the past, so I'm also trying to get rid of the requirement that people have to say what their religious reason is for having absentee voting. I think it's none of government's business what religious obligations people have. So I'm somewhat hopeful about that bill.
Well, I think that it's one of those things that if we could get the early absentee voting without an excuse needed. Of course, in Northern Virginia, because one of the excuses is if you're going to be out of your jurisdiction for something like 11 hours or 12 hours, and anybody who works anywhere other than in their home in Northern Virginia would seem to be able to meet that requirement.
That is, and thank you for mentioning that. I think more people should be aware of that and use that. I use it every time.
Oh,
my district includes Arlington.
Right.
I go and campaign in Arlington.
Exactly. Well, we'll see how it goes this year because it would be nice to have some improvement in how we're handling the elections. And I want to thank you for coming on the show. I know you're getting ready to run on down to Richmond, and we will check in with you during the session to see how things are going. And good luck.
Thank you, Bettina. Thank you.
We are going to be going to break, and then we are going to come back to talk with Sandy Evans. She is the school board member from the Mason District. So stay with us. We will be back in 2 minutes.
Too many women get hit by their boyfriends and husbands. Too many women are pressured into having unprotected sex. Half of the people in the world living with AIDS are women. It doesn't have to be this way. Together, we can change this reality. Let's strive for a world free of violence.
At Volunteers of America, we don't just give kids a way to stay off the streets. We give them the tools they need to reach their full potential. We don't just help the elderly receive needed care. We help them live life to the fullest. We don't just provide food for homeless individuals and families. We provide job training and placement so they can buy groceries. Volunteers of America is a national organization that for over 100 years has provided programs and services that allow people to overcome their challenges to become vital members of their community. At Volunteers of America, we don't just help people, we help people help themselves. Find out how you can support the programs that are working in your community. Contact Volunteers of America today. Call 1-800 899-0089.
Drivers face all kinds of distractions.
Guys, stop playing, no?
127 consecutive. Before your wireless phone becomes one of them, stop. Drive safely. Keep your phone in easy reach and dial sensibly. In bad weather or traffic, call later and use a hands-free device. Remember, with wireless, safety is your call.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. I'm Bettina Lawton. This is Inside Scoop, and I'm your host. And we are going to welcome into the studio Sandy Evans. She is the Fairfax County School Board Member from the Mason District. I will say she is up for re-election this year as well. So we're very glad that she is willing to come on the show. She's going to talk to us about what the school board's legislative priorities are this year. So Sandy, thank you for coming.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Bettina.
I know you're
delighted to be here.
Run right over here from a work session, and I appreciate it. You do a lot of hard work. What is it that the Fairfax County School Board has as its highest priority legislatively?
A lot of what we have as a legislative priority comes down to money, like with so many things.
Yep.
It's important that we keep our K through 12 funding safe from any cuts that may come down the road. At the same time, it's important that we don't have too many state mandates added on, because that, of course, translates into money as well as other issues as well. We have a long-standing position against having new mandates. That affects us both in terms of our ability to deal with our school system in the way that we feel that we should, but it also, generally speaking, costs us money.
Well, and isn't that partly, I had read it somewhere because I know we had a huge budget hole statewide, and they did a whole bunch of different cuts, and certain parts of education was affected. And I recall at the time people saying, gee, they're taking the money but not the requirement. And
that's right.
Effectively becomes an unfunded mandate for you.
Absolutely. And one of the issues that we have here in Fairfax County is making sure that people in Richmond understand who we are today here in Fairfax County.
Well, we're the richest county. We don't need their help.
And that's what we keep hearing. And we are a well-to-do county. However, our numbers of students who are living in poverty is growing. Next year, we will have more than 28% of our students who qualify for free and reduced meals. It has been growing steadily. We will have more and more students who speak another language at home and who need English as a second language services. We have more and more special needs children of various kinds, more at-risk children. So whereas even within the county you can say, well, 28% is our countywide figure for free and reduced lunch, in my part of the county, over in the eastern part of Fairfax County, my schools range from about 39% free and reduced lunch to over 70% free and reduced lunch. And I think there are people in Richmond who don't see that side of Fairfax County and those very serious needs, and particularly with the various types of special needs children. So we need to get our message to Richmond. Now, of course, our delegates and our state senators, they do a great job of trying to get that message there, but we as a school system need to be down there as well to get that message across.
Now, it's a lot more expensive up here to both educate children and pay the staff, and I know that there was some kind of cost of compete or some index.
Yes.
Where is the status of that? Because one year it was good and then one year it wasn't.
Right, and so we got a benefit in the last reformulation, and we wanted to keep that. You know, they have so many formulas in terms of funding, and we want to be sure, or hope, that all of the funding formulas with how we are reimbursed, that they stay strong. We're going to have to be watching that because all of these things affect what we get from Richmond.
Right. Are there anything that, when you say you want to keep and make sure that you keep all of your K through 12 money, is there anything that you're particularly concerned that Richmond might try and decrease? Or
well,
take away?
I'll turn that around and say one of the things that we would really like for them to partner with us on would be pre-K, and that's another one of our priorities, as is the county. And we hope the state will also partner with us. I think that's one of the messages that we want to get across, is that this is an investment in our children. And I think on a philosophical level, people agree with that. Every dollar that we spend on pre-K gives us many, many dollars back in later years, because we have prepared our children to go into kindergarten. So that is that's an area where we are hoping that the state and the county will partner with us to make sure that we start our children early. You mentioned where could cuts come. Cuts can come from anywhere. You know, the formulas are one that we always have to take a look at. And as we go down this road, we just have to make sure that we don't have to experience these cuts, because we are having our own budget difficulties, of course, and we have had serious cutbacks in the last several years.
Yes, we actually have. Talk to me a little bit about this A through F grading system.
Oh, yes.
Now, there weren't any schools in Fairfax who failed, were there?
You know, if this were in effect today, which we don't have, it's not in effect yet. Okay. This was voted on a couple of years ago in the last legislature. It was delayed. Okay. The Fairfax County School Board would very much like it to be eliminated. I see this as a very dangerous idea. It would be devastating and very simplistic. It's a very simplistic idea. You know, you look at test scores, you look at different measures, and you slap a grade on a school. In almost all cases, it would not really show what a school is like. You can have a school with tremendous challenges, doing tremendous work every day with their students, and perhaps they don't have as high test scores as others, because of the challenges. And what we would like to see, assessments are a critical area for us. In fact, the work session that I just came from, we had this discussion about the school board wanting to actually have a national voice, a national and a state voice on the issue of assessments and accountability, because we feel so strongly about this that we would like to see different kinds of measurements. We do need to measure how we're doing, but right now it's all test.
Well, I thought the standard of learnings, I thought they had dropped some of those and we weren't focused so much on that.
There's an SOL Innovation Committee, and that is a very good thing. There are recommendations that committee is recommending to the General Assembly, and we certainly hope that the General Assembly will adopt those recommendations. That those will it's a step in the right direction, but we're not all the way there. We still need to be looking, for example, at what we call growth measures. If you start at a certain level with particularly challenged kids, for example, how far have you gotten that student? It shouldn't be just a rigid measurement. We also want to see different types of measurements. Again, not just an A through F grading system where a school all of a sudden is labeled a C school. And what will parents
nobody
say?
wants to go there.
Well, and what does that do then? What does that do to that school?
That's very demoralizing, I would think.
And parents with choices then would leave.
Exactly.
Parents with choices then would leave. It would be the same as if you have a restaurant that says an A and a restaurant that says a B side by side, which are you going to go to? And because it's misleading, it would be tremendously misleading to be judging our schools by that measurement. It's not just that parents would get the truth about it, parents would get a very misleading picture of any individual school.
Are the grades determined by things like just are your kids meeting test scores as opposed to the improvement they've made or any kind of recognition about the particular challenges of the community?
It's very simplistic, and the challenges aren't cranked in there at all. And so that's why we would like them to just eliminate that idea entirely and look back at assessments, have more reasonable assessments, including looking at the comparisons and how did you start out and how far did you bring a child? How far did you bring a child? the other piece of this too is what do we really want to measure? I think we need to step back and say, what do we want to measure in what our children are learning? One of the strongest things that we're doing now, we have a portrait of a graduate.
Right.
That was new this year. We just approved it last fall. Mm-hmm. And it talks about what we care about our children knowing when they graduate from high school. We want them to know how to communicate. We want them to be able to be thinkers, be true thinkers, to be able to collaborate, to do teamwork. Mm-hmm. We also want them to be healthy. Right. We also want them to be ethical. None of these things so far is a good measurement of any of that. And so we're looking for, we want our students to be broad-based thinkers, mm-hmm. and in order to assess that, we need something else than what we have. And we don't want to just pile on top. We don't want to say, okay, we're going to measure, now we're going to measure 20 new things as well. Right. So that's a conversation that we're having at the school board level as to, now that we've set out our goals, mm-hmm. now that we've put together this portrait of a graduate, how do we determine that our students really are doing all of these things?
Because those are not things, the things that you've just listed are not things that you measure on a test. It's a much more subjective analysis that has to go into that.
It absolutely is. And yet at the same time, if somebody's a good critical thinker, mm-hmm. certainly a teacher can tell that this student is a good critical thinker, that this student is somebody who knows how to collaborate with a number of their peers, mm-hmm. you know, and with their teacher. And at the same time, when you talk about character, this is something you're not going to bubble in on that one.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you're not going to.
So I think that is probably, of all the issues, other than the money.
The money.
You know,
the money.
It all goes back to the money. We've got that.
Well, you're doing some new kind of collaborative process with the Board of Supervisors.
That's
Last year was very acrimonious. This year there's supposed to be some kind of collaborative thing I've heard about.
Well,
What's that about?
Well, we have a joint legislative package as well. Mm-hmm. Things where we agree on, things like being sure that Fairfax County is recognized in a way where the funding stream is calculated in a way that is reasonable and takes into account the reality of our needs, and the mandates, being sure that we have more flexibility there. So we have combined with the county board, and I think that's a good thing. We can go down to Richmond and go in tandem and advocate for a number of these things together.
Good. Well, hopefully that'll work out so that it can all get done. Now, I can hear the music, which says we've got a very short period of time. We've got a budget process coming up. When is the first public hearing? Do you happen to know?
Well, we just got Dr. Garza's budget, mm-hmm. and we had a very short session today on it with some questions and answers. We're going to have a public hearing, and then we will approve our advertised budget early in February.
All right, so I want to thank you for coming.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Tell everybody to pay attention to the school board, the website, check out the budget, lend your support, lend your voice. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.